Thank you for joining me here on this last segment of today's show. We started this entire episode talking about the Cowboys defense, and now we bring it all full circle here and incorporate two other defenses that I think are having some struggles here to start the 2024 NFL regular season. A consistent theme, I think, has built up over the last few weeks for these three contending teams, right? In the NFL, the Jets, the Eagles, and the Cowboys, all having doubts about certain parts about their defense so far. And, we are going to look at and just kind of compare all three of them, which has looked the worst and which could be the most troubling to try and get over their own hesitations, their own doubts going forward, and are they correctable as we move along in this regular season. So starting off with the New York Jets defense, this one was interesting just because they were meant to be the driving force, I think, of this New York Jets team, right? With Aaron Rodgers coming off of an injury, and even from the time that he was signed, being, 38, 39 years old or something like that, I don't think the plan was to have him come in and be MVP level Aaron Rodgers. I think with being 40 years old, I think it's not realistic to kind of expect him to play to that level, especially when, again, this defense played so good last year, and I think the narrative around this team, obviously last year, was the fact that, if they had a quarterback, if they had the offense rolling, this defense paired up with this offense could be so special, right? And now we're seeing it, but we are missing the pass rush element of this team that I think is become a bit more concerning, right, overall. They were overwhelmed in week 1 against the 49ers, losing 32-19. Their run defense didn't look that great or that good at all, allowing 147 yards on 28 carries to Jordan Mason. And Brock Purdy, like I mentioned on that pass rush, barely got his jersey dirty, barely had any sort of pressure in his face at all the entire night. And their offense just wasn't quite ready yet to be the catalyst for any sort of win, right? They weren't there quite ready to, be the reason why they won that game, right? They weren't ready to go toe-to-toe with an established 49ers offense, right? Aaron Rodgers in his first game back, still trying to feel out his teammates and what works out best for them. He looked good with Garrett, but Mike Williams really wasn't out there. Allen Lazard didn't impress. So they weren't at a spot where they could just take over a game, and with their defense kind of being overwhelmed, that raised some concerns in week 1. Then in week 2, their offense looked a little bit better after another week of trying to get used to each other. Really with Breece Hall, I should say, with this offense looked better because he was the second leading receiver and the lead rusher in this game, leading receiver behind Garrett Wilson. So not ideal, but it is looking better. You got Breece Hall involved more into this game, so that was a bit positive. But a negative of the result of this game was the fact that Jermaine Johnson tore his Achilles, unfortunately. So the depth now at pass rusher is really a concern, right? Where before you weren't already creating enough pass rush, and now you lose arguably your more established pass rusher in this defense. Now, Hassan Reddick is celebrating somewhere because now, if before I said that they had no other choice but to bring Hassan Reddick back to kind of take advantage of this moment, they really have nowhere else to look but to go to Hassan Reddick and provide him with a blank contract, a pen, and just tell him what he wants just to bring him in as a pass rusher, right? That's the kind of level that I feel like they need to have when trying to bring in someone, because if you don't have Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald looked very good in this game. He recorded 3 sacks, so that's great, but are you going to depend solely on a second-year player to create all of your pass rush? The secondary is pretty solid, right? You have Quincy Williams, C.J. Mosley, Sauce Gardner, and guys like that on your defense, so you have to take advantage of that. Quinnen Williams on your defensive line also, I don't want to forget about him, but you need edge rushers as well to kind of shrink that pocket and have Quinnen Williams be more available to getting some of the sacks, creating some of his own pressure as well. So the biggest issue with them has been their pass rush and will continue to be their pass rush unless they get Hassan Reddick through that door as quick as possible. Then moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles defense, coming into this year, they were meant to improve drastically, I think, with Vic Fangio and some of the new players that they brought in. I am upset that they haven't played Devin White a bit more. I don't know what the story is with that, but if you don't want to start him, that's one thing. But I think Devin White could definitely add a lot if you just have him in, rotating in. But the fact that he hasn't played at all through the first 2 weeks, I know he was hurt in week one, but he was inactive in week two. So I'm not really liking how that's all playing out. But apart from that, I think a lot of people haven't been so impressed with them, and similarly with their pass rush, like I mentioned before in this episode. But in week one, they allowed 29 points, but they still won with the level that they have on offense. So that's a great thing, right? Credit for holding the Packers, for holding strong in the red zone and only allowing field goals, right? But when you are faced in those situations where your offense might not be humming or you're missing a piece or two and the defense has to be almost perfect with no pass rush, then you have situations like you do in the Falcons game, right, where your defense is tired towards the end of the game. If you thought you had no pass rush before, when everyone's tired, it's basically like rushing with nobody out there, right? And that's what it looked like with Kirk Cousins out there on that 2-minute drive. It looked way too easy. I'm not gonna say like I could have gone out there and completed those passes, but like Kirk dropped back like 4 steps, stopped, thought about whatever else regarding football or non-regarding football, and was still able to make the pass without having any Eagles defender in his face. That can't happen, especially with how good this defensive line should be. And now that's one thing. And going back to their starters, right? You look at this starting defensive line: Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Josh Sweat, and Bryce Huff all don't have a sack yet. And only 2 weeks in, I do acknowledge that fact, but we got to see at least a little bit of something. I mean, you could have expected 1 sack out of these guys, but to have none, only Zach Bond has 2 on the year and Milton Williams has 1. And that's pretty much it for this Eagles defense. It's not like they're getting it from anybody else. They're not producing enough sacks from everybody, and their starters are just not getting home as much as they should have, in my opinion. And also, their run defense hasn't looked necessarily unstoppable, with Bijan Robinson playing very well. Josh Jacobs played all right, but it just exposes the secondary, right? If you continue to have these running backs pile run after run after run, and then the defensive line obviously gets tired from run blocking and they're not getting home anyway, the secondary looks exposed, like I said, right? Like I mentioned before with the Falcons, they won't hold all game, right? And that's when you have certain situations where Drake London just beats your corner, and with no pass rush, the quarterback sitting back there all day, someone's going to get open, and it makes you look even worse than you should. So that's pretty much my census overall with the Eagles and how their defense is a bit worrying from that standpoint. Again, with no pass rush like the New York Jets. And talking now about the Dallas Cowboys, I had to include them in here, and I mentioned all the problems with them before, right? The fact that they can't play from behind, the fact that this defensive line excels at getting after the quarterback, right, and trying to create turnovers and splash plays off of that. But when they're getting gashed against a solid running game and the run blocking on the offensive lines, aren't necessarily great, and or they're going up against run blocking offensive lines, they tend to struggle, and they become non-existent, right? The effect that this defense has almost becomes non-existent when they have to defend the run and they don't look ready to pass rush right after that. They aren't creating these sacks, especially with the turnovers that helped them so much last year with Deron Bland, with some of these guys creating strip sacks and whatnot. The benefit that they had off of that was that it sparked, or it put this offense in such favorable situations where they more often than not took advantage of that. Now, without these turnovers, now this defense having to do a lot more with the run, with the pass rush, it really doesn't work out because, again, I don't feel like they have the players to succeed with this game plan. And now the turnovers took off the pressure off of the offense last year when the defense scored for them or they put them in favorable situations, right? Like I said, but now they're not really complementing each other. They're not creating those plays that they had a year ago. So that's the problem with them. I feel like they just don't have the players. And to answer, the question, which one has worried me the most right now, I feel like it has to be the Cowboys, because similarly to the question I posed before, which team do I feel will struggle to overcome these problems? I think it still is the Dallas Cowboys, right? Because it is one thing to say that your pass rush just isn't there, but it's also another thing to say that you just don't have the players to create that missing pass rush, right? The Eagles have players to create this pass rush, right? The Jets technically have somebody, but he hasn't been in the building, right, with Hassan Reddick. So once they figure that all out, I expect the Jets to get better. Robert Saleh is a defensive-minded coach. I expect him to fix this. Same with the Eagles, right? Jalen Carter is a tremendous player like we saw last year. Jordan Davis is a monster in the middle. Josh Sweat, he could create a little bit of his own. Bryce Huff had a 10-sack year last year. There is some adjustment period there. But the Dallas Cowboys, yes, they have Micah Parsons. Yes, they have DeMarcus Lawrence, Trayvon Diggs, Deron Bland once he comes back. But with that all being said, missing the players to create run-stopping, situations, guys in the middle, guys just willing to come downhill and stop the run. I feel like they're missing that kind of attitude, that kind of character about their defense, to which if they don't have it on the roster whatsoever, I don't know how they're going to get better moving forward unless their offense, finds something with Zeke and somebody else steps up at some point in the year. It's not going to look that much better overall as a team, and that's why the Cowboys defense right now, from the start of the show back until now, a full circle moment, is worrying me overall the most out of all these teams in the Jets, in the Eagles, and the Dallas Cowboys. So those are my feelings on it. Definitely concerns for these other teams, right? They're not just off the hook, but the Cowboys definitely, I think, have more on their plate to deal with in this 2024 season. But that is pretty much it for today's episode. Thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network as well on all forms of social media. Check out more content around this show on both YouTube channels with a variety of different ways to cover the NFL over the course of this season. And lastly, remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more of these live shows with me, Manny Maradiaga, covering all the headlines and stories around the NFL. Thank you for joining me again, and I hope to see you guys back here with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to